Hello, everyone, and welcome to For Devs. My name is Justin Mack.
I'm Ethan Connor.
I'm Troy Taylor.
I'm reluctantly Kelley right here.
Very good. All right, so today on For Devs, we're going to be talking a little bit about some build predictions. Some of the different things that we think are going to happen, some things that Microsoft might potentially do, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, there's a lot of general industry news this time of year, so we'll mostly be focusing in on build, but there's probably going to be a lot announced this year and a lot to cover. So, I guess we'll just get into it.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, even before we get into it, what are you guys most excited for about build this year?
So I say this every year, okay? And every year they don't disappoint, and that's basically the VR, HoloLens, AR stuff. It's always a big theatric thing.
Yeah, those are the best demos. For sure.
Troy, you got to do one last year.
Yeah,
I got to do one the year before, and they've progressively gotten better and better. Now the thing is, this year I'm curious to see if there are actually any practical applications that anybody's actually showing. Because more now, granted, who was it? Was it BMW or?
Saab.
Saab was there, and they had a pretty cool thing where you dismantle like an engine or something like that. Is that basically what it was?
Oh, I think that was a different one. Saab was actually more about like a war, like giving an overview of a war zone.
Oh, that's right. I do remember that. Now there was another exhibitor there who like pulled a big rig.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember that? And then I can't remember exactly who it was. Finger food, yeah. And they had this big rig where you put on the HoloLens and you could basically open up different things on the truck and see different things about like the diesel engine and different things like that. That's about as close as they came, in my opinion, to a practical, like something I would actually buy into application. Now the Warzone stuff is great for like military planning and different things like that, or even city development projects or something like that. It's really, really good for that. And I'd like to see more along those lines this year. That's the thing I'm most excited about, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely concur with that. I want to see some more HoloLens applications, and I'd also like to see what kind of developer tools they are going to be coming out with, and how they're planning on enhancing the developer community.
Good point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably most interested in that. Microsoft has a lot of different platforms. Last year they announced XAML standard. We haven't really seen too much progress on that. So
yeah, that's actually been a little bit questionable for over the past year.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm interested in seeing what their roadmap looks like for that. Even how much they mention it. Really, where they want to take all the different platforms, and not just the XAML stuff, but what they want to do with Win32, how they want to further expand on .NET Core.
Mm-hmm.
That's the pragmatist in me talking, I suppose. But that is what I'm most interested in from a development standpoint.
Yeah. And Ethan?
Well, I'm most excited for probably talking to other developers at Build. I mean, it's always great to kind of interact with other developers and see what's going on in the industry, get some outside perspective. We all know what's going on with GrapeCity. It's always good to hear from, our friends in other companies that are also developers and, like I said, broaden your horizon a little bit and, hear what other people are doing, what they're up to.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what Microsoft has to say, that's only half the picture, really. I mean, putting your finger to the wind of the community, so to speak. I mean, that's...
Yeah, it's also interesting to hear people's take on what Microsoft's doing, you know what I mean? Because they can, most of them will speak pretty candidly, like when, you're just in casual conversation at, like for instance at the booth when we're there. I've heard people speak pretty candidly about some of the things that Microsoft do both ways. But some could be negative, some could be really, really positive. You know what I mean? But also the whole Universal Windows.
UWP.
UWP. Where is this thing going? Like. We have, like you said, you were talking about like XAML standard and different things like that. What's the next step for UWP? How do you increase adoption for this? Because it seems like, at least in my logical mind, if something like UWP as a platform is going to be available in something like Xamarin, for example, like Xamarin Forms, or Xamarin UWP if there's if this thing actually happens. I'm not sure, has it happened yet?
I mean, UWP is part of Xamarin Forms, but it would be, XAML standard would basically make the syntax more similar between all the different XAML platforms. So part of the issue is, WPF, that was a high investment platform that Microsoft spent, a number of years sort of grooming as a successor to WinForms. And what ended up happening is once Windows 8 came along, they sort of thought, well, we didn't get this right. The adoption wasn't quite high enough. Let's take what we like from this platform. Let's add some new APIs. Let's get rid of some stuff, and let's create WinRT. WinRT didn't really land at all. But, they tried to take the best parts of that, move that into a Windows 10 platform, and you end up with UWP. UWP has some of the same problems WinRT did, though. Adoption rate isn't high enough. There's really just desktop in general. It's hard to incentivize that. People love the idea of cross-platform code, and UWP was sort of offering that in a way between Windows different platforms. But the mobile platform hasn't really taken off up to this point. I mean, Windows Phone's effectively not anywhere anymore.
As we know. So and that's another thing. I've heard rumors, and we were just talking about this, a little bit earlier. But we've heard rumors about this alleged Surface phone. Rumors are resurfacing about this.
Yeah.
And something like that. I guess it kind of gets me excited.
It is exciting.
Again, for what are they going to put on it? Is this going to be something new? Is it going to be this Polaris thing? Or is
sure.
it like?
Yeah, the part of me that's not a pragmatist, that's probably what I'm most excited for. The part of me that likes watching Apple keynotes, that's what I'm looking for.
I got you.
I think the Andromeda is at least that's one of the names I've heard bandied about for that. But yeah, sort of this, foldable mobile device. I mean, it just sounds
pretty sweet.
It sounds cool, yeah. So.
And I think, Ethan, you mentioned earlier the breakdown. I guess Windows Polaris is one of the big question marks for me, or Windows Core.
Yeah.
Is one of the big question marks for me this year. Are they actually going to move this forward? Are they going to say stuff about it? Are they going to announce new devices? What do you think?
Yeah, it's still speculative as of right now, obviously.
Yeah.
But with Windows Core, from what I've read, the understanding is that it's going to be comprised of different what they call composers, and what those are going to be kind of flexible shells to allow for more flexible computing across platforms. So Polaris, like Justin mentioned, that's going to be primarily for desktop computing.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Andromeda, that's going to be for mobile. Aruba is going to be for the Surface. And then what I'm most interested in seeing is Oasis for mixed reality and what they're going to do with that. And what that's going to look like, because from what I gathered, the main purpose is to give a good UI experience across all of these different platforms. And with new devices that come out, perhaps a new Windows Phone, like you guys mentioned, you would, in theory, be able to use, say, the desktop shell and then transfer over to the mobile shell.
Yeah.
And, hypothetically transfer over to the mixed reality shell. But we won't really know until build, and we'll see what they have to say. But I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm hoping they actually mention something about it, because the fact that you have the kernel that you can transport anywhere, but the shell is the only thing that changes. That'll solve a lot of problems that you had with even Windows 10 for mobile or Windows Phone, wherever that went. You know what I mean? So
right.
It'll essentially be Windows, the same Windows that the basic kernel of it, but the shell's the only thing that really changes.
But I actually have some questions about that, which is why I'm curious if they bring it up at build, or whether this ends up being a longer term thing we don't hear about for a while. But one of the things I heard about Polaris is, because this is an attempt to make a modular core and to actually modernize the code base. So make it more secure, make it faster, make it more portable. One of the things that they might be jettisoning to some extent is Win32 support. Now, I can't imagine that that's completely gone, but from like a developer standpoint, your Win32 apps, what would you have to do to get them to run?
So I read a little bit about that, and they had the Win32 apps would still run only in a, I guess it would be almost like a framed environment.
Yeah, some kind of compatibility layer.
Some kind of just kind of like IE uses or something like that. I didn't read too much about it, but like I said, I'm hoping that they flesh this out a little bit more at Build or subsequent events this year, because I think that's a really exciting step for Microsoft to take. It would go a long way with, if they actually apply the same principles to something like UWP, where these applications would adapt for multiple devices, because this is that's one of the things, coming full circle back to the UWP question, is that's one of the things that's really prevented me as an app developer from kind of pursuing that platform. It was almost a secondary thought, like what are the devices that I want? There's this, and the desktop was kind of an afterthought. So
yeah, I mean, desktop's definitely it's in an interesting place because there's so much pressure from, like I said, cross-platform solutions, which, the web's been around and become such a rich platform that, making a really rich website, that's kind of the ultimate cross-platform solution right now. I mean, you see the growth of all these sort of JavaScript frameworks too that might have some kind of mingling with native, like in React Native, or I guess that would be the major example. Something like Flutter is a little like that too.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, so that's Google's
cross-platform API. But the interesting thing is I was reading about Microsoft adding support for progressive web apps into Windows 10 generally, just as how would I put this? They're sort of like, well, they appear as if they're native apps basically. So a progressive web app, you have a very rich website, web application. In the past, if you wanted to bundle these sorts of things into native experiences, they tended to have kind of clunky interfaces. It would be something like, you put a web view into your desktop app, and then you just sort of like have this output there, and it doesn't work quite the right way. Doesn't look quite right a lot of the time. Same issues on mobile too, like with Cordova and Ionic and that kind of stuff. But with progressive web apps, Microsoft's actually saying, hey, we want more apps from your websites. Like if you have a really good website, why don't you submit it to us? We'll basically let you go through this builder app that constructs sort of the well-formed code for your progressive web app, and we'll put it in the store for you even. So it's kind of interesting they're doing that at the same time as they're potentially developing this new Windows core. They're potentially augmenting UWP. They're making these moves in Xamarin as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, as kind of a secondary option, I think that's great.
Yeah, I think it's actually in some ways the right path for them, just because at this point the web, it is very much like a common denominator, one size fits all. That has its drawbacks, but it's...
I mean, look at Chrome OS.
Mm-hmm.
There's entire notebooks and laptops and actual computers that run basically just a browser.
Yeah, and
is essentially what it is, and the browser, Chrome specifically, is powerful enough to basically handle all of your tasks, and that's Google is one of the pioneering forces behind these progressive websites. They're full-fledged applications, responsive. They have all of the same things that you'd want in a desktop application. A lot of them, not all of them, obviously. There's a layer there that you're missing, but I'd like to see some. And I think, thinking about it, is Windows 10 S, was that kind of a, maybe they wanted progressive web apps for something like Windows 10 S because it's
still hard for me to evaluate what their goals were with that, because it's a swing and a miss, but I'm not really sure what they were swinging at exactly. But,
yeah,
I guess the good thing about that is the lesson was learned pretty quickly, and it sounds like too. Some of my understanding with Polaris and this Windows core is that it's not going to just take over for Windows 10 Pro immediately.
Oh no,
that's still going to continue to exist. It's hard for me to imagine that over time they wouldn't move more and more towards overlapping in the sense of what's at the core is now completely shared between the two. Mm-hmm. But I think at outset, they don't want to try to replace their desktop operating system.
Not immediately. I mean, so eventually, I think the plan is more to have this core OS have all of the same features that you already have. So
Right.
Windows 10 Pro is, built into this core kernel, right?
Yeah.
And then the shell looks exactly the same. So it's almost like this brand new architected operating system that looks and feels exactly the same as Windows 10 Pro. Eventually, I think that's where they want to get. And then they want to transfer that look and feel, or maybe a modified look and feel, more or less to different devices like the Surface Hub, you know what I mean? Which that may be sooner than later because again, the rumor mill was in full effect, and I hear that they may announce at the very least a Surface Hub that's actually running this Windows Core operating system. So that would be exciting again. So.
Yeah, from that rumorville, the trusty source that it is, I was reading that consumers are probably not going to see anything with Windows Core OS probably for a while. The primary target market is actually education.
That makes
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're talking about Chromebooks in the same
Right.
sentence. I mean, that's
Yeah,
100%.
like I said, in Windows 10s seemed to me like it was geared towards. Well, it was.
Well, they announced it at an education
It was-
event.
it
They
was
did,
an
but then they kind of
educational-
extended it a little bit to everybody, and then
And-
they kind of decided, well, you can upgrade for free if you buy.
That was after they're like, okay, our best laptop ever is going to be running this cut down version of Windows. That to me, that was probably the biggest mistake they made. If they would have just marketed Windows 10s in that straight line that they were, instead of here, let's put it specifically on our flagship device.
Right.
And have everybody get super mad about it and want an upgrade. I think that was probably the first, to me at least, incarnation of this idea of having this cut down OS that has the capability to just run the store apps, and that would have made this progressive web apps thing even more enticing, to different app developers, because essentially you could just create a Windows Store app that's a website, basically.
Yeah.
So, like I said, the whole Windows 10s thing kind of baffled me, and I'm looking forward to this Windows Core OS system.
Yeah, Polaris sounds like a more interesting kind of comprehensive plan. So I'm curious to hear more about that.
I like the names too. The names make me happy.
Andromeda.
Especially what was it, Oasis?
Oasis.
Fantastic.
For mixed reality.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I'm a fan of mixed reality anyway.
Yeah.
Any alternate reality other than the one I'm currently in, big fan. Big fan.
So true.
Yeah.
I'm curious also to see kind of what their take is, or how they plan on contributing to progressive web applications. The understanding that I had of a PWA was that it was what it is like essentially is a way to enable like great user experiences regardless of your network connection. So yeah, having like a native experience on whatever platform obviously falls into that broader umbrella of that goal, the goal of a progressive web app. But I'm curious to see kind of what they're providing as far as to developers to help them build these progressive web
question.
apps.
Actually, interestingly, I did see that there's a website you can actually go to right now if you look around online a little bit. This Microsoft sponsored, where if you have a website, you can actually, I think, submit it basically to them for them to. I would assume, I haven't done it myself, I would assume you get some kind of feedback as far as changes you need to make. But and interestingly too, I read that if you have a progressive web app, if you've already invested this way, they're actually using the Bing crawler right now to go out and find progressive web apps online, and if they're big enough, they're actually automatically submitting them to the store for you. So you're already getting that extra visibility without really any effort on your part, which
That's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
So what's the criteria? Do you know, like for progressive web apps?
you might know.
More on that later.
I was going to say, I can only jump from XAML into so many other different spaces at once, but
Google has a whole like plethora of resources on
Yeah.
their on progressive web apps, and kind of like
Are there
what
like
goes into.
Yeah, Google definitely spearheaded.
are there like design guidelines and stuff like that that you should follow, or like
I believe so.
widely accepted design guidelines?
I think so.
Yeah.
And I mean, like you said, there's that notion of it working in sort of like an offline kind of mode. So I'm sure that there's a lot of guidelines as far as how it's going to handle data if you're not online and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and what
So-
you see, perhaps if your application is cached, you
Mhm.
still get like a decent experience, but you're not, even though you don't have access to internet at the moment.
Yeah.
Or if that you have an intermittent connection and it connects back, then you're able to pick up where you left off, but without noticing too much in the changes. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never created a PWA, so I'm just talking.
This is new to me too.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's. I mean, that's all from within the past year. I would say that's really become a big topic. At least I hadn't even really. I mean, if you would have said PWA to me a year ago, I wouldn't have had any idea what you were talking about. So it's really been the last 6 months I've heard people talking about it more and more. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
That's interesting. Well, we'll have to keep an ear out
Yeah.
at Build. So nice.
Yeah.
Well, there's I guess the DBA deep down in my soul, wants to know what they're doing with SQL Server too.
Mm-hmm.
With all these, so when I think of data, or let's say I'm developing an application for, it doesn't matter what it is. I'm not necessarily thinking SQL anymore. I'm thinking more of an object database like Mongo or Firebase or CouchDB or something like that. But SQL Server is kind of like, I don't quite know how to say it. It's I don't
school.
Old school. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Old school. So they have SQL Server 2017 out now,
Yeah.
and they've added. They're really targeting a specific group with it now. So it's more data science, machine learning, enterprise, big data. Those are the things. If you have that kind of stuff, you're going to want SQL Server because now they have built-in scripting for R and Python languages. So I mean, that's literally machine learning.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And any kind of data science makes it really easy. So it's interesting to see that they're targeting specific groups now because SQL Server has always been this. It's just the database. If you want a SQL type database.
Yeah, it was just a Microsoft-backed relational SQL database.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and a lot of newer applications and progressive applications, they're going the way, a different route in NoSQL or object databases. So I'm curious to see if Microsoft has. Does Microsoft already have a NoSQL office? Wait, they do, don't they? In Azure.
yeah, Cosmos.
Cosmos DB,
Yeah.
Cosmos DB. That's right. So
I'm-
I'm curious to see if they're going to kind of, leach some of the features that that you get with a structured query language database in a NoSQL or object database. So I think it'd be cool for them to kind of mix the two up.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it was pretty new around this time last year when we were attending Build.
Oh, Cosmos?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that there's probably much more robust, support around that now. And
Yeah, they added a lot. They've added a lot of services to Azure too, just in the past year since I used it last.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where I'm super confused when I go in. I'm like, I just need to know how to get to this spot, and then you have to drill down into several menus
Right.
because they've added so much, which is great. But I think it's almost like a feature war between them and AWS because I look at AWS and they're doing the same thing. Although, I look mostly at the free tier stuff for AWS, and it's a massive offering
Right.
with some pretty misleading names. I don't know what half of these things mean, but once you actually figure out what they are, it's pretty cool. So I'm curious to kind of get in on maybe some of the sessions at Build and try to have this explained to me because I'd like to learn a little bit more about Cosmos DB. Maybe there'll be a few sessions on that. But like I said, the DBA somewhere in my soul, wherever it may be, is kind of curious to see what's going to happen to SQL Server. Whether it's obviously it's going to live on because people it's been around for ages. People rely on it, but or any of those features going to leach into the into the other offerings is something I'd really like to know. So
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I have a list of things here that I think are pretty much a lock that they're going to talk about them at Build. Do you guys want to just go through some of this stuff real quick?
Yeah,
let's hear 'em.
So for Visual Studio, I'm sure that there are going to be updates for both Visual Studio for Mac and Visual Studio on PC. On Mac, probably the big headlining thing that they're going to emphasize the most, they're adding Razor, JavaScript, and TypeScript editors. So, Visual Studio for Mac, it was mostly, I mean, it's Xamarin Studio. It's mostly been for Xamarin in the past. They've added MVC support, so you can do some ASP.NET stuff in there. By actually adding these other web-based editors, it should be a lot more robust as an actual IDE on the Mac platform. To pair along with this, .NET Core 2.1, C# 7.2 will be announced. I can go through .NET Core a little bit later. I'm sure there'll be enhancements to .NET Standard. There's going to be a push for new Xamarin Forms projects. This is actually the project templates. So this should actually be nice. They're going to have much nicer looking multi-page templates that should be available for, I believe Android is what they're starting with, but there'll be one for iOS too, and eventually they'll come to Xamarin Forms.
Yeah, so what do they have now? They have the master detail.
One of them is actually an overhauled master detail that actually has much more modern, nice-looking styling.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
because some of the ones were a little bit. I don't want to say they looked outdated, but they were just a little bit.
They weren't exciting.
Yeah,
I mean, they didn't
really
necessarily scream mobile either.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, at least to me, looking at an application developed with something like Android Studio side by side of a Xamarin Forms project, you could tell there was a difference there. You know what I mean? So, I think the closer they can get to, actually,
something that actually looks like.
I mean, it looked like it. You could tell it was supposed to be an Android app or it was supposed to be an iOS app, but a little polish couldn't hurt, and I'm glad to see that they're doing something like that. So that's good.
Yeah, agreed. And that extends to on Mac, they were still using portable class libraries rather than .NET Standard libraries. That's going to be gone in the next version, which is good. They needed to do this. So.
Yeah. You're going to get rid of PCLs completely?
No, PCLs will still be there. It's just when you create a project, it's not going to use a PCL to use a .NET Standard library.
So this is a problem that I just ran into. That a lot of the libraries that are out there and the components and the third-party stuff was built for PCL, and a lot of them. For example, this is just an example. I was looking for a barcode library for Xamarin and Android specifically, and when I went to create a new project, the only thing that was available, like you said, was the .NET Standard 2.0, and I looked on NuGet. I looked online for any kind of .NET Standard 2.0 compatible library, but all I could find were PCL. So I think developers are going to need to take some time and update, their libraries and their extensions and different things like that. I would imagine that
it's just targeting. We've already made this switch. We made this switch back in the fall, but it is a change.
Some of them actually just work if you plug them in. Some won't unless you make some changes to actually run a PCL inside of the .NET Standard project.
The profiles and the targeting for PCLs are a real mess. So that's part of the reason why I'm glad that they're
don't
doing
get me wrong. I'm glad they did it.
Yeah.
But it's just some compatibility issues if it is not because of it. So
definitely
nice.
So that's all on the Mac side. On the PC side, I'm sure we'll see some UWP updates. We're going to get a new version of Windows 10. A little bit more on that later. I saw that they were going to update Blend alongside the XAML designer changes they made last fall. So,
do people still use Blend?
I don't, but some people might.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, they're investing here, so I'll give them their due.
Some people swear by it. The designers really love it. I used it a few times, and I wasn't too sure about it. Greg actually used it quite a bit, too.
Yeah, Greg. One of our coworkers who used to deal highly in XAML, he was a big fan.
You make it sound so bad, like he was breaking the law.
He dabbled in the black arts, yes.
That's
No,
funny.
blend's
No,
all right. It's just
it's good. I'm just curious to see if people actually still use it.
Yeah, I haven't. It's the first time I've heard of it.
Oh, really?
So speaking of the black arts, they're going to be updating C++ development tools as well.
Speaking of the
So they're, I guess, bringing some standards conformance that they were missing before, some improvements for code analysis and IntelliSense, fixing one of those nasty Spectre variants. So, yeah, I know people use C++. I moved on a while ago. C++ is great if you're building high-performance science applications or, games, but
I've been lucky that I never actually had to move on from it because I never was on it. Which was good for me. Although like I said, I started in VB.net, so I don't know. That's kind of the same thing. Lesser of two evils, I guess.
Well, that's shades of dark arts. So there'll be a number of improvements for Xamarin as well. We already talked about the project templates. On the PC side, they're improving the XAML editing. So the IntelliSense should be more similar to what you get in WPF and UWP. Basically more responsive, more status indications, that kind of stuff. They're also adding some performance improvements, both on the Android and the Apple sides. So faster emulator booting on Android, some new static types for iOS and Mac, which means smaller apps, faster app startups, reduced memory usage. And I marked this down too. I'm kind of a fan of this since we release a lot of our controls as NuGet packages, but they're actually adding a migration tool for moving from the old packages.config style to the package reference style.
Oh, neat.
CS projects. So
I like that.
Yeah, I do too. That'll encourage people to move to the new CS proj types, which is, I think, a good thing for everybody.
Yeah. I've heard a little bit about that. Well, I guess that's a question for another 4 days.
Yeah, that could be a deeper conversation. Yeah, I mean, but I'd like better dependency resolution is the primary gain that you get from.
I'd like to, I'd like to take some time and do a deep dive into, our Xamarin offering and Xamarin in general, just to kind of pick it apart because I find Xamarin really interesting. So.
Just a general thing. So I have no idea if they'll say anything about this, but we are getting to that point. Visual Studio 2019. I would be a little surprised if they didn't say something about this in the next year. I don't know if that means that at Build. They mention something, or if it's some sort of fall kind of event where they mention something.
Yeah.
But I would think that they, are going to lay out some kind of new version of Visual Studio beyond these incremental updates at some point in the future.
Yeah. Gotcha. All right, so we are out of time, unfortunately. I love these chats. I love these chats. I really do. So. Just real quick, upcoming events. We're going to be at Build, obviously. Come check us out at the Fluent conference. I believe, Troy, are you going to be there?
I don't know yet.
We'll see. I'm going to do what I can to get Troy
determined.
there. That conference, that's at the Kalahari. Really good time had by all there. And then Pittsburgh Tech Fest. So if you're in Pittsburgh, stop by and see us at Pittsburgh Tech Fest. Again, I'm Justin Mack.
Ethan Connor.
Troy Boy.
And
I'm Kelley Ricker.
The artist formerly known as Kelley Ricker, and we are 4 Devs. Thanks, everybody.